Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We have some challenges in our country, even around the world. People, especially now, dealing with so much anxiety. And we talked last time we got together about that. We're going to go a little bit deeper and look at different kinds of anxiety and how that looks and how that can be treated. And he is somebody that helps people with this all the time as a mental health coach. And he is Dr. Ray Smith, back with us. Hi, Ray. How are you?
I'm fine, Steve. I'm glad to be back with you.
Same here. And especially what we're talking about. Many times it just describes somebody has anxiety or I have anxiety. When we talk about different kinds, what kinds of anxiety are there?
There are several in my book, Anxiety Quest. Don't know if you can see that.
Absolutely.
They're all listed out there and defined. The most common one is generalized anxiety disorder. And that's when people worry too much, too often about too many things and haven't the training to be able to say, oh, that's just anxiety. When I think these thoughts, I feel this anxiety and I make these responses. So the idea with anxiety, especially generalized anxiety, is to change the way that you're thinking about it. Last time we talked a little about a couple of the other kinds. The things that anxiety all have in common are worrying too much and then thinking about things irrationally. So some other things, there are physical and psychological distresses from every form of anxiety. And we talked a little about frequency, intensity, duration, and impact on life. So when those things are too much, people are so troubled that they get inertia. We've heard about fight or flight. There's also freeze, like deer in the headlights, and foggy brain, so you're just not thinking right. And when anxiety kicks up that amygdala and we get those endorphins and cortisol washing over the rest of our brains, then we can't handle anxiety the same way we could when we were kids and our moms would soothe us and tell us that things were going to be okay and to look at it a different way. So that's what we want to do. The persistence of anxiety is very concerning to me. The statistics are supposed to be that nobody ever dies of anxiety. Unfortunately, mood disorders, heads you're anxious, tails you're depressed. And people with depression kill themselves all the time. People with the kind of anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, are killing themselves way too much. The statistic now for the military is 58 soldiers and vets a day are taking their lives, and some of them in the VA parking lot. So I think they're trying to get a message that they are too flooded to be able to think about this, or they don't have mom comforting them in their arms anymore. And their well-being is distressed, especially the ones who can't sleep or the ones who can't work, the ones who can't maintain relationships with their family or friends. There's problems that come from anxiety that are difficult prices for people to pay. So that's what we want to do with the people who have had anxiety for way too long and it has affected their present. Get some counseling going and learn some tools. And if you don't want to do counseling, go to Amazon and take a look at Anxiety Quest. It's there in paperback, Audible, Kindle, and ebook. And it's also on our website. You can download those things for free. Our goal is to help people.
I just want to jump in, if I may, Ray.
Please.
You mentioned tools to deal with anxiety. Is there, in your opinion, a top tool that you would suggest? I mean, everybody's different. Every situation is different. But is there one that rises above that can be very helpful?
I think so. I like emotional freedom techniques. EFT, and it's tapping on the acupuncture points. And what I'd like to do in our next video is to orient people to EFT and then give some explanations and some scripts that people can use to do it on their own.
Sure.
One of the most amazing ways that EFT is being used is by the military. For PTSD, EFT tapping is now the number one suggested method for dealing with post-traumatic stress. And there is an excellent video with one cuss word in it of 3 guys who have PTSD who started doing the emotional freedom techniques and tapping, that it changed their lives in a day. And there's a psychologist and a psychiatrist on there who say, we've never seen anything like this, where people who are just a complete wreck could get off of drugs and alcohol and deal with their anxiety appropriately. The last one of those is a guy my age from the Vietnam era, and his wife was going to leave him because he kept threatening to shoot her and their children. And he's not a monster. He just has an anxiety disorder. Not just, but he has an anxiety disorder, and that changes all of his thinking, including what to do with people he loves, including the guy in the mirror. So EFT is my favorite one. We'll go into more detail with that one next time. There are other things that are just almost unbelievable when you are uptight. There is a form of gentle massage where you massage each side of your fingernail and the end of your finger. And you can do this about 25 or 30 times or more. I'm starting to have it now, but you get a big yawn. And of course, that fills up your lungs and everything. Well, if you do that for 4 times and you've had those great big yawns, then you're ready to leave the anxiety behind and switch off the anxiety and go to sleep. So there's a lot of simple things that we're doing with the workbook that we have. I don't know if you can see that or not.
Sure can.
It's the Anxiety Quest workbook, and it just goes a little deeper to talk about the techniques, but also to be more interactive with people. So if you don't want to do counseling in person, or you don't want to get somebody from your insurance company to do telehealth with you, then you can go to Amazon and get these tools and work on them on your own. And maybe if you've been embarrassed or ashamed that you're not pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, then go through some of these things alone, and then you might be more open to being open to other people. I do think that we're made for relationships, and not just, counselor and patient or coach and client, but friends and neighbors. Last time we were together, you talked about a couple of folks who had experienced bereavement and how you were coming alongside them. You don't have to be a trained professional. You don't have to give a prescription to be there. And the lady, you said, I got this. Well, that reassurance from somebody you trust, because I got anxious and I lost trust in me, but you seem to be willing to stay with me. Maybe I'm a worthwhile individual after all.
So, I love what you said too, Ray, in the different types of techniques.
Yeah.
If somebody finds even a little bit of comfort in that, it may reframe their mind to think, oh, well, if that worked, imagine if I did speak with somebody.
Right. And maybe that ounce of hope. You mean I could change how I'm feeling just by rubbing on my fingers? Yes. You mean I could feel less anxious if I thought about this in another way? Yes. Reframing would be a great example. All of those people who have registered for the draft, who thought they were just doing what they were supposed to for the government, if they get called up to be involved in this war in Israel, they are going to be anxious. And can I make it through boot camp? Can I be out there with courage? Well, what if we looked at it a different way? What if we looked at it like there's going to be training, there's going to be support. Everybody who's involved in this wants me to come home alive. Maybe I could be less anxious, and maybe I could be helping the other military people who are involved in it. So just a simple thing to change your mind could be reframed. If you look at any picture in a museum, or even those that you have on the wall, if you change the frame of them, they would look differently. the frame is there. It's supposed to set off that picture from everything that's ordinary around it and focus your eye on the beauty and the beholding. Reframing things with anxiety, you probably need some help with sometimes. And pardon me, if you remember when your kids were very anxious about a spelling test or something, and you could, well, you've done all right on the other ones. I wonder if we could think about what that A would look like on your spelling test instead of miserable failure, all or nothing thinking. Oh, yeah, well, thanks, Dad. And we know that those simple interventions of care can change your mind. And by changing your mind, you change your feelings. Anxiety does not come from situations. It comes from how you think about situations.
That's such a huge point where we think that, we could have been in a relationship and somebody didn't do the right thing. Maybe there was abuse and you think, you have anxiety because of that. Well, I have anxiety but it's also the way you deal with it, because you could be somebody else going through the same exact thing, might not even affect you, might just roll off. So it's a really good point. I don't think we look at it that way.
I don't think we've talked about Viktor Frankl, have we? He wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, about his experiences in 4 different Nazi concentration camps. He was an Austrian psychiatrist, I think. And he would see people that would be in those striped pajamas out building railroad in the snow day after day, and was pretty amazed by them. And he would see other people that arrive and they get off the train and see, this is Auschwitz or something. And they would lay down and die. They didn't commit suicide. It's just they collapsed. And so he was curious. He'd go around to those people that kept going, and what keeps you going? Well, I'm going to find my spouse after the war. I'm going to find my kids after the war. I'm going to go back to the farm after the war. I'm going to get my business cranked up again after the war. And one of the most amazing guys was like a video recorder. He was recording in his mind, on this day, this guard did this crime to this concentration camp inmate. And he was ready for the Allies to come and for there to be court and to hold those people responsible for each of those things. Well, after the war, Viktor Frankl comes to America and says, hey, you guys, it's not what's going on, it's how you think about it. You don't know my boss, or you don't know my wife, or whatever. Really? Is your boss worse than a Nazi concentration guard? Well, no. Is your wife starving you and torturing you? Well, no. So he had some credibility when he came and said, those people who had something meaningful to look forward to in the concentration camp kept on going. And those people who gave up hope gave up life. Now, if they were shoved into the gas chamber, it didn't make any difference if they were looking forward to seeing their family after the war or not. But his point, it's not the concentration camp, it's how you deal with it. And he would tell stories like somebody who got a little piece of bread, taking it over to someone who could no longer get up and go get their piece of bread. And just by doing that random act of kindness, then they helped. They were looking to somebody else. How could I serve you while we're here? And it made a difference in their resilience to be able to withstand that kind of torturous circumstance. And his point's well made. If I can make it in Dachau, you ought to be able to make it in Manhattan.
Interesting reframe that you bring up there, because now some of those people were focusing on gratitude, on helping, giving what they had to help somebody that was not doing as well as they were, if you want to call it doing well in that situation. But now they've taken it and reframed it over here, where they could have dwelled on it and it could have crumbled them like some of the other people. So the reframe thing, very important. Yes.
We talked a little before about our inability to guess outcomes of what we worry about. And 93% of them never coming true, 85% of them turning out better than we had predicted. And I think that's one of the parts about coaching for hope, that you have this thing in mind that you'd like to be able to cope, maybe not as well as those poor people building railroads in the snow, but I want to be able to cope. Well, how do I get from here to there? If you can see in the future, I want to be loving and serving and giving, and right now I'm frozen in fear. Well, that's what the anxiety quest is about. But let's take the journey from where you are to where you want to be. And it just closes the gap over time from what is to what could be. And it draws people into a future that they can see in their head and get just as excited about as those people in the concentration camp who wanted to find their family. There is something to look forward to. Well, there's also something to look back on. War, the concentration camp, the gas chambers. That's true. All that stuff needs to be dealt with, but it doesn't need to be the central theme of our life. There was a Jewish lady who was really given a fit a year ago or so. She was a twin, and her parents and her twin sister were killed by Mengele, or whatever the name of that doctor was that did the experiments. And she came out last year and said, I forgive him. Well, a lot of the Jewish community went nuts. That's unforgivable sin. You can't say that you forgive somebody for all those atrocities. And she said, I choose to forgive. And I am moved by that. Someone who had been tortured and dealt with the way she was to ever get to the place where you could say, I forgive. There's a guy in San Francisco that's in the forgiveness business, and he's been in Northern Ireland with the mothers of soldiers from England and from Northern Ireland. Got those ladies together, and they left there having forgiven. And I can't imagine losing a son. And especially in a situation like that, it would be hard to forgive anybody. Their anxiety about getting together with the parents of the enemy soldiers was through the roof. And somehow this guy from San Francisco was able to help them think about the other people in the room. Well, I have every right to be mad. And you also have every right to minister to somebody who shared your loss. Oh, yeah, that reframes it. So instead of being a mother of a dead soldier, now I can be the friend of a mother of a dead soldier. How you look at it makes such a difference. One of the kinds of anxiety that is most difficult to do that with is phobias. And Jack Nicholson portrayed OCD phobic guy on As Good as It Gets, I think was the name of that movie. And that's funny because he exaggerated it so much. But if you wasted a lot of your day washing your hands repeatedly and doing compulsive behaviors because that obsessive thought, what if I get sick? Well, and what if you get sick because you rub the skin off your fingers?
Or put chemicals. I was one of those people, not like OCD, but very, I call it germ aware. And I used to use a lot of hand sanitizer. And I stopped doing it so much after COVID because everybody else was doing it. And I thought, you know what? Something just clicked in my mind. But I get it. Like, not to the point where I would freak out, but it would be like, yeah, anybody got hand sanitizer? It would be on my radar.
And on that radar meant that you were reframing it. There is a COVID pandemic. I'm helpless. Well, no, I can do some hand washing and mask wearing, and there's some things that I could do that I think would help me. And if I have something, keep me from spreading it to other people. I had to knock off that soap with the bacteria agent in it. It was eating up my cuticles. So wow. I think it was meant for somebody who's tougher than I am, maybe.
Yeah. You know what it was? A part of it, when somebody told me how the absorption rate in your skin is. And now, even if it's alcohol, and there's some other chemicals in there that we don't, we don't even know everything. If it's maybe not a name brand, there was a lot of stuff floating around during COVID time.
Yes,
that's going into your skin. Like you could take a clove of garlic, put it between your toes, and in 2 minutes you taste it. That's how fast it goes. So when you think about that, might not want to, use those chemicals as often.
Well, and that's a rational thought. If I'm scared of sunburn and I slap on all of that stuff, it's being absorbed into my skin the same way.
Yeah.
What if I looked at it a different way? And, maybe instead of a golden tan, I would like to sit in the shade and listen to the kids giggle at the pool or something
Sure.
like that, just to change the way that you look at things. In the Anxiety Quest workbook, I listed over 400 different phobias. And some of them, if you're not suffering from that one, would seem funny. We know people who are afraid of spiders or snakes or whatever, some of which have some reason to be afraid of them. But there are people who are afraid of heights. I mean, it just, there's no limit to the imagination of people who could do the what if about any particular stimulant that could make them lose control of their anxiety, and they would feel so badly that they would act badly, and they would show that fear. They would isolate, they'd lose interest in things they'd normally be involved in, and sometimes that would mean it would ruin relationships. If Jack Nicholson couldn't walk down the sidewalk for fear if he touched a crack it'd break his mother's back or whatever, well, we'd have compassion for that. It must be awful to think that something magical and terrible would happen if you missed and stepped on a crack. To reframe that, hey, the sidewalk is here for me to get where I want to go. I'm grateful for whoever built it. I'm not as anxious then. I don't have the same phobic reaction to it because I'm thinking and feeling differently. That's the empowerment of knowing more about these different kinds of anxieties. And I really want to depathologize them. Years ago, when insurance companies took over healthcare from doctors and everybody else, to get counseling instead of counseling and development to just help folks, now we have to pathologize it. Generalized anxiety disorder is something that the insurance company will pay for treatment. So then we have to label that, and you have to carry that forever. Well, if you just would like to get better and not have some diagnosis on you, I'll give another great example. A boy I worked with years ago wanted to go into the military, and they requested all my records. And I said, he's fine. I'd trust him with a gun or my kids. Nope, they wanted all the records. Well, unfortunately, he came to see me because his addiction was to video gaming. And he was very anxious if he was away from that game and not getting to the next level. So his diagnosis was obsessive compulsive disorder. Well, when the military got that, he was not allowed to become a soldier. And he'd outgrown it. He was doing fine, but it didn't matter. He had that diagnosis in his record that showed him having some pathological problem that would keep the military from trusting him. And that's why I'd like to turn more and more attention to coaching. We don't have to run those things through an insurance company. We don't have to say that you are medically needing some drugs and treatment. You just want to grow. I'd like to handle things better. I'd like to step on a crack with freedom. So I'd like to do more coaching with people so that they don't have to have that diagnosis hung around their neck that could come back to haunt them in ways they couldn't give informed consent to.
You bring up so many amazing points here, Ray, in that working with a coach, counselor, and not using an insurance company, it's truly confidential.
Yes.
Yeah. Things we don't think of it that way. And how sad for that guy that wanted to join the military. That's like saying, somebody had COVID, they recovered from it, they're fine now. Oh, you had COVID? No, you can't take this stuff. No. Completely wrong. It's called healing.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
That's what we want. Yeah. And the idea that you can predict in the future, if you want to go into politics or law enforcement or Department of Defense thing, that there's not something that you had as a child or a teen or a young adult or during a difficult breakup in college that's going to prevent you from living your best life. Well, people get anxious about their anxiety because how's this going to show up later to keep me from where I want to be with anxiety, sobriety, and free of it? So I want to help people get rid of the anxiety. I'd also like to coach from where you are to where you want to be. There's that gap. So how do we take that quest, that journey? And I like to use the idea of Luke Skywalker. Here he is, a Jedi Knight, and he gets trained and he goes out there and he gets his destination by having somebody who could walk alongside him as his coach and help him end the evil empire. Well, all the rest of us have a journey too. Where do you want to go? What will it look like? How will you know when you get there? If a miracle happened tonight and you got over your anxiety, what would you have? What would you feel? What would you do then that you do differently than today? Well, I'd be courageous, or I'd be bold, or maybe you would also be looking around at other people who suffer and what can I do with or for them? So
maybe you might even see things you never saw before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, don't they say that, seeing is believing, but when I believe it, then I see it, that there are some other options. I can be free.
Love the idea of certainly the book, but the workbook. And I believe that many of us gravitate away from reading up on things like this because it can get too deep and too clinical. Not the case with Anxiety Quest and the workbook. It's user-friendly, easy for somebody to grab onto.
Well, it's only really half a book, because over here are the questions, and then on this side, you are supposed to be able to respond to those questions. And there's a rating scale on all of them. And so this one, to feel your emotions, lifestyle risk factors are linked to anxiety. How severe a problem for you is diet, exercise, or smoking? And then you make the scale and you then explain why that is. So that was my hope. If you can't get into coaching or counseling, could something at least provoke some of those questions so that I am figuring my way to close that gap from where I am to where I want to be?
Fantastic.
It helps to have somebody alongside.
Well, we start with the workbook. And the first picture I had was, that's like holding your hand, taking you through, even, not a human at this point, but that might also inspire you to work with a coach. The book, the workbook, links for those, they're on your website, right?
They are. The coaching website is drraysmith.com, and the counseling side is healthycounselingcenter.com. And both are easy to find. The unfortunate part, if you just Google Ray Smith, there's an old 50s rock and roll guitar player named Ray Smith, and he'll come up fast before I do. So you have to keep digging a little further.
Yeah. He's not a doctor, though.
No, he's not. And I'm sure he's deceased. And I don't mean to speak ill of him at all, but he got more publicity than I did.
And he might maybe been around a little bit longer. That's how it works with Google. Ray, always a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for all the insight. And thanks for reframing things today for all of us, whether we deal with anxiety or not, just looking at it in a different way. Totally appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. I hope somebody can get an idea that will change their mind and change that anxiety, and certainly change the way they behave. There are other options.
Look forward next time we talk.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.